Hello everyone, I'm Brett Falls from the Bearded Man Studios, and today I'll be showing you how to make a UI loading screen. And this will be used for many different things in your app or game, but the main thing is just having something that is very nice, has its own splash screen, has a progress bar, and goes in and out. So to get started, I have a blank project. There's nothing in here, nothing new, so you can save this wherever you want and I'm gonna just modify a few things. So first thing first, let's create a folder for our scene. We're gonna call scene, and what this scene will act as our main screen. So for depending on what type of game or app you're working on, you generally have like a main scene that you're working in that will help direct the user into the game itself or some type of networked scene or something along those lines. But you have like a encapsulated scene that holds all that information and logic to transfer the user to and from. Whereas the loading scene that we're going to make is kind of like a prefab that we're going to either, we could load it dynamically by making it its own separate scene and loading it asynchronously to the system itself. That way it loads in and it goes back out. Or we just have it as a prefab that we just shove into the main scene that doesn't get destroyed, and we just kind of utilize that. So I'm going to go along the thought process of making it just a prefab and it's just going to be part of the game itself. That way we can access it whenever, it's always there. We can do whatever we want with it. And if we need to deallocate the resources that we're putting on it, we could do so on its own separate prefab and modify it from there. That way we don't have to load a scene, destroy the scene, or do any of that stuff. We can do that, but I'm not going to go that route. So we're going to make a scene. We're just going to call it main. This is going to be the main scene that we use. We could use a camera. This is just like our 3D layer of what we want to do. We don't have to have it for 3D. You can make 2D games, 3D games, or apps and stuff like that. I'm not going to bother with this camera as much. I'm just going to get rid of the GUI layer because I don't really care about it. And the flares layer. And I'm just going to leave everything default. I'm actually not going to use this camera as much. You'll see I can just move it around and we get to add extra logic like adding cube and making it rotate around the cube if we really want, just to showcase that it's its own camera. And what we're going to do instead is actually make its own separate object for this camera. And this camera is actually going to be our UI camera. So we're going to say it is our UI camera. And in our UI camera, we're going to have don't clear. We're not going to render anything but the UI. On our main camera itself, we don't care about the UI, so we're going to deselect that and just make it so that this camera only controls the UI. We're going to change it from perspective to orthographic. Set the size to, just do 15. Let's not make it go that far, let's just go 10 and go -10 in case you want to move, oh, whoops. You want to make it go backwards for your UI. Oh my gosh, there we go. And we need to get rid of this stuff. We're not really going to bother with it. Let's get rid of all this extra components since we already have an audio listener and all the other stuff. Let's zero everything out and set the layer to UI. So our camera set up. We can save the scene. That way it's saved there. And now the next thing to do is actually create the loading prefab that we're going to use for this UI camera. So in here, we're just going to name game object content. And this is where we're going to possibly instantiate it. Right for now, for this, we're just going to create a prefab and put it in here. But in the future, you will want to instantiate your content into this camera of whatever content is going to be used for the camera that we're trying to utilize for this UI. Otherwise, we can always make more culling mask and how we want to go about that for our other cameras. Or there could be like a particle system that you want to happen on top of the UI or behind the UI. But we're not going to worry about that. So we're just going to worry about the content. So we're going to right click. We're going to create a UI. It's just make an image. This canvas, we're just going to drag it in here. We're going to call this the loading screen canvas. And this image, actually, we don't really need it as an image right now. We're going to just make it take the full screen. We're going to just say that this is the do UI. It's the UI of this canvas. We're going to say the screen space is actually camera, so we're going to drag our camera right in there. Sorting layer, we're just going to leave everything default. Ordering layer, same with the thing. You'll notice if I click on the camera, the preview does not show the UI. Well, it's probably because we don't have an image, but it's not going to show the UI because our distance is too far away. So you see I added an image, and if I click on the camera, you don't see anything. Well, the reason why is because our canvas has a plane distance that's way too far away. And you saw when we made this, we set it to +10 and -10. So we're gonna instead change that. So let's go back to our canvas. Let's make it 0, and now it shows up in our camera. So now we actually see it in here. And we can move this around. We can move it wherever we want. That way we can have multiple cameras, and the way that they interact with the game is dependent on how we want to use it. Let's also change the constant pixel size to scale with screen size. Let's go with 10. Let's go 1920 by 1080. And then, yeah, let's keep everything else pretty much base of what it is right now. Let's not worry about that. And there we go. We got our canvas set up for the UI of our screen. Everything's all fine and dandy. We can turn this off and on in case we want to turn off our UI elements, but keep the UI camera existing for other things. And now let's actually make the loading bar. So to make a loading bar, a very simple one, I'm just going to create an empty. I'm just going to click on the anchor presets. I'm going to hold down Alt and go to the bottom one right here, so it goes and ties to the bottom. Let's also change our scene camera to isometric. Zoom in a little bit, and you'll notice our height is a little bit big for it, so I'm gonna make it small. I don't like having a giant loading bar, so let's go to like 40. And you'll see that it's a little off, so in order to fix that, I'm just gonna set the pivot to 0. And then now if I set the Y position to 0, it'll always be at the bottom. That way I can scale it based on the bottom. So I'm gonna set it to 40. And that's good enough. So we're gonna call this the loading bar area, or progress area, either way. And then put an image. And in this image, we're gonna scale to the full thing. So everything looks good. That's what we want. You could also change the color on how you want to set it. You can make it green, make it blue, black. I'm just gonna go with some type of bluish. There, that's good enough. So this is gonna be our actually loading bar. So we're gonna call this the fill, and we're gonna go to, so the UI is the whole thing, and we have that. Let's get rid of that. Let's actually make a slider. Let's get rid of this. We don't want to transition for this. Let's not make it interactable because we're not going to make it so the user can actually tap it. We'll drag our fill into the fill rect. And you'll notice that I got rid of it, but that's because our value is default to 0. But if we go and fill it up, you'll see it fills up the entire screen. So we have the UI for our loading bar set up, which is great. That's what we want. We also want to have like an image in the background. And the reason why is because you tend to want to block out the screen, so you can be doing like a scene transition in the background while this loading screen takes up the front. So we'll leave this by default the way it is right now because it works. It's what we want. We want some type of, you could change the height of this as well, so I can make it take up more of the screen or less. It doesn't have to be, as much as it is right now. All right, so we're gonna leave it as 1 just so we can see it compared to the rest of the screen. We're gonna make a new UI element. We just created an empty. We're gonna call this splash. This is gonna be our splash screen. We're gonna take up the full screen, and then we're gonna create an image inside here. And then this one will be, I have an image that I downloaded online, so we're gonna make another folder. Create, call it art. I'm going to show you 2 differences of what's going to happen. So here is the one of this type of art. It's just flowers. And we're going to set it to sprite. And everything looks good. Just make it high quality because we want it to look nice. Get some good fidelity. All right, just drag our flowers onto here. There you go. We got our flowers for our loading screen. And we're gonna say this is the splash, or just, yeah, image is fine. It's not a big deal. And we want a background for our splash. So let's actually create UI image, just drag it below, BG, and let's make it black. Take up the full screen. So you can see I kind of take up the full screen. I have my splash. I have my image that's in front of it. You can recast these if you want to make it so that you can click them during the screen, although I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't bother as much. I'm going to go on my splash object and add a canvas group. And you'll see if I control this canvas group, well, it's a little fast, but you'll see that it fades in and fades out the way that I want it to. Now, if I were to use, let's say, a different piece of art, like America, for example, and say this one doesn't have an alpha for the black, or, it doesn't have an alpha layer for your image, it's going to look weird if you have a different BG, because you tend to want to make it so that this image itself has high fidelity, and you also want to make it sure that it preserves the aspect ratio. The reason why is because you might have a stretchy screen. So if I make it like this, you'll see it gets really stretchy. And if I were to go back to my image and I say preserve, you'll see it looks nice. So it'll always match it and make it look really nice. The problem is when you try to do that with this type of image, let's say I didn't have the background, and I instead don't use flowers, I use America, you'll see that there's gaps going in from left and right. Well, if you added background, you're like, oh wow, that fills it. It looks great. It's gonna totally cancel it out. The problem is when you do the splash and you try to do the alpha, you'll notice that it's not the same. It's not on the same layer. It's gonna look weird. So the best thing to do is actually have the transparency for the image that you're using and try to make it so that that is its own separate image, and then having the background as its own separate image. That way, when you do the alpha for the transitions, it'll be fine. It'll actually blend in perfectly like we just had before. So if I go back and change this to flowers instead, now when I do the alpha, they fade out at the same rate, which is great. That's what you want. So I'm gonna leave it as flowers, delete America, and then I'm going to, so I kind of have everything set up, but I want one last thing. I want to make it so that all my UI inside the loading canvas can also fade out. So I have my loading bar, I have this image, and I have the background. I have these images on its own canvas group that can fade in and fade out, but I don't have this loading bar, and I don't have any other additional content like text and stuff that may show up at the bottom. So I'm going to create a canvas group onto my loading screen canvas. And now when I set the alpha, everything gets turned on and turned off, which is great. So that's it. We set up the UI. We're on our way. Now we just need to do the final bits, and the final bit is basically just creating the scripts that's actually going to control the canvas groups and control the loading bar that is going to control this slider right here. One more final thing you probably want is text. So I'm going to have text. It's going to take up the entire screen. I'm going to make it white so it's visible. So make it probably fill up the screen properly. Middle, there we go. And we're going to just say like 100%. Something very simple that's visible. So you can see like right now it's not going to affect the percentage of that, but we're going to make it so that this changes with the script that we're going to use. So let's go with that, and everything's good. And save it. And this itself is going to be its own prefab. So it's going to create folder prefab. There we go. So now it's own prefab. Now we can turn it on, turn it off, and still keep the UI layer for anything else that we might load for content for that UI canvas group for this camera. So let's create a scripts folder. Scripts. And let me pause this really quick and let me think. Actually, never mind. So I will make a script. I'm going to go in here, create C#. We're going to call it loading manager. You can call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it loading manager. I'm going to pop open this so we can modify it. Alrighty, so let's get rid of this stuff. We might add it back later, but for right now, let's get rid of it. What you could do here is you can make this a singleton class, and you can use it throughout your entire game, or you can make it a service and make it like your own service locator. That way you can pull it. Right now, I'm just going to make a very basic singleton because I just want it to work. So, it's going to return instance. All right. And we're going to set this instance when it is actually created. So we're actually going to do the private awake. And this will say instance equals this. Cool. And then if there was an instance previously, okay. So this will kill any instance that we had previously on this whenever this is created. So that way we don't have like two loading managers in the same time. And cool. So we have our singleton set up, very basic. And we are going to now create the loading part of it. So we're going to make a region. It's called the loading data that we need. So we're going to make a private action. Let's import this and call it onComplete. So whenever we completed the loading, we will want to do an action because we just finished it. Private func. We'll have float as the progress, and the private coroutine, progress, coroutine. And that should be it of what we need for the loading data. Now we need to actually control the UI elements. So we're going to call UI here, region, move this back. All right, we're going to do private, game object. Actually, no, let's do, so we have two canvases in here. You'll see I have my canvas group right here that controls the whole thing. And then I have a canvas group for the splash. And then I also have my fill sliding bar, and I also have fill text. So this is going to be fill text. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 elements that we need to transfer over to our code. So let's do the simple one, slider. Let's make sure we're importing the Unity UI. So we're going to say progress slider. Let's actually make it lowercase. This is just my coding standard. You don't have to follow along for the coding standard. You can use your own standard. And I'm going to have two canvas groups. So canvas group. This is going to be the main canvas group. And then there's going to be another canvas group. And this is going to be the splash canvas group. And then we are having some text to indicate the progress that we made. So progress text. So we have our variables for all the UI elements that we want to affect. It's pretty good. Let's move these down and keep them together and leave it like that. How long we want to transition to this black screen. So we're going to make some public, or a way of accessing these variables for the public. For like, say I want to specify how long I want it to take to transition to that black screen. So we're going to just say transition and region. Okay. So I want to say transition to splash. So I'm going to say it's going to take 1 second for now. So this is the amount of time it should take to the splash screen to go to the full transparency. which is going to make it so that it takes up the entire screen. And then we're going to make it so that that transparency goes away when we fade out. So we already have control for that. And what else do we want? We probably want to control the fading out of it. So we're going to say transition to, transition out, splash. And we wanted to transition out. We could do the same rate. We'll keep it the same for now, and we can adjust this later. So say we want it to go really quickly and go fast to the splash, and then transition really slowly out of it. Or we can do the same, go the opposite. So we'll leave these exposed. We'll say they're serialized field. That way we can modify them in Unity. So we have that set up. And let's just start plugging that in. Let's make sure that it's compiling it. Cool. Let's slap on our script that we just made, loading manager. Here we go. So we have our progress slider. We have our progress text. We have our splash BG canvas group. And we have our main canvas group. And we have a transition to, transition out. So everything's all pulled in there. So everything's all cool. We're going to leave it as the full of everything right now. Not going to worry about that too much. Now let's go back to our code. Start adding a bit more. So we're going to add an update loop. And we're going to make just a very basic debug way of showing this loading screen. Otherwise, you normally would call this from outside of this class. You would call it from some other code, but for now, we're just going to make it so that you can press a key. So we're going to say get key down, key code, and let's just make it like a space bar. That way you can just press space bar and see it really quickly. So start, we're going to say time.time, max, how long do we want it to take in general, let's say 5 seconds. And let's actually set up the rest of our code so that way we can actually do the loading portion of the code. So we're going to do public void setup. This is going to set up our actual loading screen. So we're going to say on complete. So when we finish the loading screen, what do you want to do after, or any code that's calling this? We're going to take in a float. This is going to be our progress function of how we are going to tie progress into it. And on complete equals on complete, and then progress equals progress, and then we are going to change our alphas. So you'll see that I have the main canvas group, splash screen, text, and stuff like this. We want to make sure that right when we start this, that it starts all at 0. And depending on the way you want to present your splash screen, you can set it up the way you want. For me, I want to make it so that your splash screen doesn't just show up right away at the snap of a finger. I want it to, gradually increase the transparency so I can actually see the whole thing and not be so jarring and have it just instantly take up my face. So let's do that. So we're gonna set our canvas group. So we have our main. We're gonna say the alpha is 0. We're gonna do the same for the other one. Splash alpha equals 0. We're also going to set the text. So our progress text, I'm gonna make sure that it says, hey, you have 0 progress. So text equals 0%. And we will want to, let me think, set the slider back to 0. The value equals 0. So everything is now at 0, nothing's in. So the first thing we will want to do is we'll actually want to fade in the main canvas group first, and then we want to fade in the splash screen in between that, after once the main one. So the main one is going to actually have the progress bar. So we're actually, thinking about this now, it's probably best to actually set the main canvas group to 1. So that way the progress bar shows up right away. We're going to set the value to 0, and we're going to set the progress text to 0%. Or you can set it to empty, and then as we gradually increase in the progress, then we can set the text. So let's set it to empty. And then right when you start seeing the progress bar, it'll start showing the text. we'll go that route. And then now the splash screen won't show up right away. It'll gradually increase over time. So we have our slider, everything's now set up for this the way we want it to. The last thing is to actually start our coroutine, but we don't have one. So we're gonna make one. We're gonna do private enumerator. We're gonna do check progress. So we're gonna go yield, return null, just to wait one frame, float progress equals 0, while progress less than 1. Then we're going to actually get our progress. So progress, oops, messed up progress equals progress. Yield return null, progress text. Actually, this is where we now consider a slider. So our slider value is going to equal progress, and our text progress text is equal to the progress to string, and we want it to be a percentage, so we're going to P1, so that will get the percent out of it. And what else? We want to make sure that when we're done, we call that onComplete. So onComplete not equals null. Then we will do the onComplete. And then we're going to say our progress equals 0. And then we're going to now do the transition back out. So let's do progress less than transition. We're going to say, so we have our to and from. This is actually the out. So we can actually do another progress before all this, the transition to the splash screen. This will be the transition out. So we're going to do current progress equals, actually no, plus equals time, delta time. And then we're going to do the canvas group. So we're going to do splash canvas group alpha equals progress divided by transition out splash. Yield return null. It's pretty much done here. And then we're going to do splash canvas group alpha equals 1. And then, yeah, everything else should be fine. And then we will say progress equals 0. So we're going to reset it again. So we are kind of setting it up in a way that way we are in control of the way that the progress is being handled. So initially we're setting in this progress of actually loading, we're going to start adjusting the slider, the text, and we probably want to adjust the splash during this time too. So this is based on 1 because it's based on the progress that you're passing in. So if anything, we want to transition to the splash before we start doing the progress. So what you would do is you would do it up here for the transition to splash, and then when we're done, we're going to transition out of the splash. So let's leave that there for now. We'll adjust it and just see where we're at after this. So let's move on. So now we are going to say while progress less than transition out. Oh, I see. We're going to move this up. Okay, so transition in splash and move this up here. Let's get rid of that. Got it. Okay, move this up. So first thing first, we're going to transition to the splash screen being full. And we're also going to say canvas group for the main canvas group. Whoops, alpha is going to be 1. Is good. So we're going to say the main canvas alpha is going to be 1 right when we start. Then we're going to set the splash to fully after once it's done transitioning to the splash. And then when we're done, we're going to transition out of the splash. So this is going to be transition out of it. And we're going to just copy the code, really. So we're going to copy, paste, going to set this to out. And then we are actually going to do the opposite in the sense that we're going to take the most minus the progress that we're making on it. Here we go. So we'll do the transition out, and now we are going to set the alpha to 0 now that we have transitioned out of that. And this will just transition out of the splash screen, but it's not going to transition out fully of the main group. So we're going to do the main group now. It may seem like a lot to fade in, fade out, but you can adjust the timings on all this stuff fairly easily just by adding an extra variable or two into here and saying, oh, transition to the main canvas and group, and we can adjust these. So let's not worry about that. We're just going to move on. So I just created this. So we are going to now transition out of the main canvas group. So we're going to do this, copy paste, transition out main. And we're going to say it's going to take like 0.2 seconds to transition out of the main one. Copy, paste, paste, paste. And this is not going to be splash anymore. It's going to be main canvas group. And now we can say alpha equals 0. So we're done. We're officially transferred out of the entire sequence. So this should be transferring to, then out, and then out of the main canvas group. Or we're setting the main canvas group to 1 the second we start. So that is pretty much it to set everything up. Now we just need to call the code. So we're going to now put in our setup. We're going to say if the progress coroutine is not equal to null, that means we have one that's currently transitioning. We're going to stop it. So we're going to stop the coroutine, progress coroutine. Let's actually get rid of this. And then we are going to say the progress coroutine now is going to equal a new one, equals start coroutine, check progress. There we go. So we've now officially set everything up, and now we just need to plug it in for our simple test. So we're going to put a debug log when it's done. So let's call setup. And we're going to pass our onComplete. So this is going to be our onComplete. This is a Lambda function for people that are curious. And I'm just going to say a simple debug log. We finished loading. Woo! And then on the next Lambda function, we're going to return our progress because it's a function. So we're going to do float delta equals time.time minus the start of when we started divided by the max, how long we want to make it take. This is just, of course, an example. So you can this setup can be called from anywhere. Right now, I'm just doing it inside here just for debug purposes and to show that it works. And then we're going to return math f and then minimum because we don't want to go past it. So delta 1. That way we just don't go past the minimum of what we're trying to reach. And then to end it off. There we go. So we set up everything. Everything's all hooked up. So now if we go back to Unity, I'm going to hit play. And you'll see everything's still here, but let me hit spacebar. Fades it in, fades it out. And our loading progress did not go in. I think it's because and we finished loading. I think we need to fix one thing with the way that it's loading. As you saw, it went in, went back out, and it was all within like the seconds that it was in there, but it did it really quickly. So let's go back and just make sure we set up the script a little bit better because we must have just missed like a line or two. All right, let's take a look. Oh, we didn't set the progress back to 0 when we started the next one. So we're going to set it back to 0. Now let's go back and hit play. Now hit spacebar. And there you go. You got a loading screen. And then fades out. And then gets rid of the bar when it's done, when it fades out again on the bottom. And you'll see that alpha 0, splash screen alpha 0. And then we're going to hit spacebar again. There you go. Still going. And then if I hit spacebar anywhere in between, it just restarts the whole sequence all over again. and because that's just the way that we're debugging. But that's how you do it. That's how you make a very simple splash screen. And you can see that it's calling our debug log that we finished loading, and it will call it after once we're done. And hopefully this was really helpful. There will be more advanced tutorials on this for those who are willing to support us. And thank you so much for watching. And I hope you have a wonderful day.